Deep within the central chamber of the Sentinel Prime, holographic displays flickered with data streams that told a story of impending catastrophe. Admiral Cathax of the Biomechanical Consortium studied the latest reconnaissance reports, her multiple neural tendrils intertwining in a complex pattern of anxiety. The Void Swarm's approach was more than just a military threat. It was an existential crisis that challenged the very fabric of galactic civilization. Diplomatic envoys from the crystalline resonance of Arctal huddled in a corner, their translucent bodies pulsing with muted communication. They had lost their outermost colony worlds already, entire populations converted into raw biomass by the Void Swarm's horrifying assimilation process. Unlike traditional conquerors, the swarm didn't just destroy, it consumed, transformed, integrated. Dr. Lyra Valdez, the human xenobiological advisor attached to the Galactic Confederation's Strategic Research Division, moved between the gathering alien representatives. Her presence was tolerated more than welcomed. Humanity was still considered a newcomer, barely registered as a significant galactic power. She carried a compact data crystal, its surface etched with microscopic computational matrices that represented years of research into the Void Swarm's fundamental structure. "The conventional weapon systems are insufficient," she announced, her voice cutting through the ambient tension. The translation algorithms embedded in the chamber's communication systems rendered her words in multiple alien languages simultaneously. "We're looking at a systemic threat that operates beyond traditional combat paradigms." Commander Zornak of the Quantum Flux Armada bristled. His species had developed what were considered the most advanced weapon systems in known space: plasma cascades that could shatter planetary cores, dimensional fold weapons that could literally erase matter from existence. The suggestion that these might be inadequate was more than just an insult. It was a fundamental challenge to their technological supremacy. "Your species has been spacefaring for less than a standard century." Zornak's translation interface clipped with barely contained contempt. "What possible insight could you offer?" Dr. Valdez didn't break eye contact. Instead, she activated the data crystal, projecting a three-dimensional molecular breakdown of Void Swarm biomechanical structures. The hologram revealed intricate quantum entanglement patterns that seemed to defy conventional understanding of matter and energy. "They're not a traditional life form," she explained. "They're a distributed quantum network. Each unit is simultaneously an individual and part of a collective consciousness. Conventional weapons might destroy individual components, but the network adapts, learns, redistributes." The chamber fell silent. Even the most advanced sensor systems of the assembled species struggled to fully comprehend the visualization. What Dr. Valdez was describing was more than a military challenge. It was a fundamental reimagining of existence itself. Delegate Marine of the Aquatic Consortium shifted her gelatinous form, neural nodes flickering with rapid calculation. Her species had survived multiple galactic extinction events, and she recognized the profound implications of Valdez's presentation. "Your research suggests a potential counter-strategy." Before Valdez could respond, a series of quantum gamma rays began to pulse with urgent synchronization. Long-range sensors had detected initial Void Swarm movement patterns. The theoretical was about to become terrifyingly real. Admiral Cathax's command interface began cycling through defensive protocols. Thousands of ships from 17 different civilizations began to move into predetermined battle formations. Energy weapons charged, quantum shields calibrated, dimensional fold drives spooled to maximum capacity. It was a display of military might unprecedented in galactic history, and yet everyone in the chamber knew it might not be enough. Dr. Valdez watched the preparations with a curious mixture of scientific detachment and human determination. Humanity had always been an outlier, a species that solved problems by deliberately breaking established rules. Where other civilizations saw insurmountable challenges, humans saw opportunities for radical innovation. The first wave of the Void Swarm was hours away. The Galactic Confederation had assembled its most powerful fleet, bringing together technologies that had taken millennia to develop. Massive battlecruisers capable of destroying entire star systems stood ready. Quantum weapon systems that could theoretically unravel the fabric of space-time were primed for deployment. And yet, as the preparations reached their final stages, a sense of inevitable doom permeated the command chamber. The Void Swarm had never been defeated. Not by a single civilization, not by combined forces, not by anyone. Not yet. The quantum navigation systems of the alien fleet went into overdrive, tracking the impossible approach of the human vessel. Chief Sensor Analyst Croven of the Luminarian Compact ran his third simultaneous diagnostic, unable to comprehend what his instruments were reporting. Quantum displacement is impossible at this scale, he muttered, his crystalline appendages dancing across holographic interfaces. The human ship, the Prometheus, moved with a fluidity that defied known principles of space-time navigation. No conventional drive signatures, no radiation emissions, no gravitational disturbances. It was as if the vessel simply existed between points of space. In the secondary analysis chamber, a heated debate erupted among the xenotechnology experts. Dr. Aria Chen, a human quantum engineer who had been seconded to the Galactic Confederation's research division, watched the proceedings with a mixture of professional excitement and carefully concealed amusement. The navigation profile suggests a form of quantum tunneling we've never documented, argued Dr. Xelnera, a seven-limbed researcher from the Fractal Computational Collective. Her holographic representation flickered with mathematical equations that spiraled in complex three-dimensional patterns. But the energy requirements would be astronomical. No known power source could sustain such continuous manipulation of space-time. Commander Zornak of the Quantum Flux Armada approached the analysis group, his biomechanical exoskeleton clicking with each measured step. "Explain," he demanded, less a request, and more a direct order. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her datapad projecting a series of complex mathematical models. "What you're seeing isn't a violation of physical laws," she explained. "It's an application of quantum principles that we've only theoretically explored. The Prometheus isn't moving through space, it's negotiating space itself." The chamber fell silent. Even the most advanced alien races struggled to comprehend the implications. Aboard the Sentinel Prime's primary command deck, Admiral Cathax received continuous updates. The human vessel's approach defied every strategic projection. Military advisors from 17 different civilizations had spent weeks developing intricate battle plans, each accounting for the Void Swarm's known behavioral patterns. The arrival of a single human ship was not in any of those calculations. Delegate Marine of the Aquatic Consortium leaned closer to her quantum communication interface. The gelatinous membranes that served as her sensory organs vibrated with a complex mix of emotions: fear, curiosity, and something that might have been hope. "Identify yourself," she transmitted on the primary emergency frequency. "State your designation and purpose." The response came not as a typical communication burst, but as a quantum-encrypted data package that simultaneously contained multiple layers of information. When the Sentinel Prime's most advanced translation matrices processed the transmission, the result was both precise and maddeningly ambiguous. "Threat neutralization protocol initiated," came the reply. "Stand by for strategic recalibration." Captain Alina Rodriguez's voice was almost an afterthought, carried on a secondary communication channel. "We'll need about 30 minutes. Feel free to provide covering fire if you'd like, but it's not necessary." The sheer audacity of the statement sent shockwaves through the assembled fleet's communication networks. Dr. Lyra Valdez, who had been studying the Prometheus's approach, noticed something most others missed. The ship wasn't just moving, it was sampling. Microscopic quantum probes extended from its hull, collecting data at a rate that made the most advanced alien scanning technologies look primitive. "They're not just coming to fight," she whispered to herself. "They're coming to understand." Tactical displays across the Sentinel Prime began to highlight the Prometheus's trajectory. Its approach vector cut directly through the projected invasion path of the Void Swarm, a line of mathematical precision that seemed to challenge the very concept of strategic positioning. Commander Zornak's neural interfaces began to overheat from the computational stress. Every predictive model, every strategic projection, every piece of tactical intelligence suggested that the human vessel's approach was not just unconventional, it was suicidal. And yet, something in the ship's movement suggested otherwise. As the first quantum signatures of the Void Swarm began to materialize at the edge of long-range sensors, the Prometheus continued its approach, unafraid, unconcerned, as if it were nothing more than a routine navigation exercise. The galaxy held its collective breath. In the subarchive chambers of the Sentinel Prime, historical data streams began to compile a contextual analysis of human interactions. The quantum archival intelligence, a distributed consciousness that maintained the Galactic Confederation's comprehensive memory, started tracing humanity's brief but remarkable trajectory through interstellar politics. 53 years earlier, humans had been considered a primitive species, confined to a single solar system. Their first faster-than-light communication had been met with diplomatic skepticism. Now, a single human vessel positioned itself as humanity's ambassador in the most critical moment of galactic history. Captain Elena Rodriguez represented something far more complex than a military commander. Her personnel file, meticulously compiled from various intelligence sources, told a story of unconventional brilliance. Born in the reconstructed megacity of New Lima, she had emerged from a generation shaped by multiple global crises, climate catastrophes, technological upheavals, and near-total societal restructuring. The communication channel remained open, but Rodriguez offered no further elaboration. Her initial transmission hung in the communication matrix like a challenge. 30 minutes, no more, no less. Dr. Lyra Valdez recognized the psychological warfare at play. Humans had a documented tendency to transform uncertainty into an operational advantage. Where other species saw chaos, humans perceived opportunity. The transmission contains multiple embedded data layers, announced Croven, the Luminarian sensor analyst. His crystalline computational nodes were working at maximum capacity, attempting to decode the quantum-encrypted message. There are information patterns here that our current translation matrices cannot fully resolve. Aboard the Prometheus, Rodriguez was anything but idle. A holographic interface surrounded her command chair, displaying multiple quantum computational models. Her crew, a diverse team of 12 specialists, moved with a synchronicity that suggested something beyond traditional military training. Lieutenant Marcus Chen, the ship's quantum navigation specialist, calibrated a series of experimental sensory arrays. Void Swarm signature detection is increasing, he reported. Probability models are converging faster than anticipated. Rodriguez nodded, her attention split between the tactical display and a complex mathematical projection that seemed to dance between different dimensional representations. Initiate harmonic resonance protocol, she commanded. The bridge crew moved with a precision that suggested they were operating as a single organism. No verbal confirmations were necessary. Each member understood their role in a complex, dynamically evolving mission profile. Delegate Marine of the Aquatic Consortium found herself fascinated by the human communication strategy. Where other species would provide exhaustive explanations, Rodriguez had offered nothing more than a cryptic promise and a time frame. 30 minutes, muttered Commander Zornak, his biomechanical systems cycling through thousands of potential scenario projections. 30 minutes against an enemy that has consumed entire civilizations. The quantum archival intelligence continued its analysis. Humanity's rapid technological development defied conventional evolutionary models. In less than a century, they had transformed from a planetary species to a potential galactic participant. Their approach to technological innovation resembled a form of collective problem-solving that was entirely unique. Dr. Arya Chen, watching the Prometheus's approach, understood something the military strategists did not. This wasn't just a potential combat mission. It was an experiment, a live-action research project designed to test fundamental hypotheses about the nature of the Void Swarm. The ship's quantum probes continued to extend, collecting data at a rate that made the most advanced alien scanning technologies look primitive. Each microscopic sensor was a computational marvel, capable of processing information across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Aboard the Sentinel Prime, tension reached a crescendo. 17 different species, each with their own complex technological and cultural backgrounds, found themselves united in a single moment of collective anticipation. 30 minutes. The Void Swarm's initial quantum signatures began to materialize at the edge of long-range sensors. Massive weapon systems charged, dimensional fold drives spooled to maximum capacity. Thousands of ships from different civilizations prepared for what many believed would be the final battle for galactic survival. And through it all, the Prometheus continued its approach. Calm, precise, utterly unperturbed. The galaxy held its collective breath. The first wave of the Void Swarm emerged like a nightmare breaking through the fabric of reality. It wasn't an invasion so much as a fundamental restructuring of spatial existence. Biomechanical entities that defied conventional understanding of life and technology began to coalesce, each unit a complex quantum node that was simultaneously a weapon, a communication matrix, and a living computational system. Dr. Area Chen's research databanks lit up with a cascade of impossible readings. The Void Swarm wasn't just a military force. It was an adaptive ecosystem, a distributed intelligence that consumed and transformed matter at the quantum level. Each entity contained multiple layers of computational potential, capable of reconfiguring its fundamental structure faster than any known scanning technology could track. Aboard the Sentinel Prime, holographic displays struggled to render the incoming threat. Traditional threat assessment algorithms began to collapse under the weight of the swarm's complexity. Commander Zornak watched in horrified fascination as entire dimensional projection models became meaningless, replaced by chaotic quantum interference patterns. "They're not attacking," whispered Croven, the Luminarian sensor analyst. "They're analyzing." The alien fleet's initial response was predictably catastrophic. Massive energy weapons that could shatter planetary cores unleashed their full potential, creating light shows that would have obliterated entire star systems in milliseconds. Quantum shields flickered with unprecedented power, dimensional fold weapons tore holes in the fabric of space-time, and the Void Swarm simply adapted. Where weapon systems struck, the biomechanical entities would momentarily dissolve, only to reassemble moments later with modified quantum signatures. It was less a battle than more a continuous process of computational evolution. Each attack became input for the swarm's collective intelligence, each defensive maneuver a new data point in its ongoing analysis. Lieutenant Marcus Chen from the Prometheus began tracking something the other species missed. The swarm's movement wasn't random. It followed a complex mathematical progression that suggested a form of distributed learning far beyond traditional artificial intelligence. "It's not just adapting," he reported to Captain Rodriguez. "It's experiencing." The human vessel moved differently from the surrounding fleet. Where other ships followed traditional combat maneuvers, the Prometheus seemed to negotiate space itself. Quantum displacement fields extended from its hull, creating localized zones of computational interference that the Void Swarm found challenging to process. Delegate Marine of the Aquatic Consortium observed something unprecedented. The human ship wasn't fighting the Void Swarm, it was communicating with it. Microscopic quantum probes extended and retracted in patterns that resembled linguistic structures more than weapon systems. "They're trying to understand," she transmitted to the command deck. "Not destroy. Understand." The distinction was profound. Aboard the Prometheus, Captain Rodriguez maintained an almost meditative calm. Her command interface showed multiple dimensional projections, each representing a different potential interaction with the swarm. Where military strategists saw a threat, she saw a complex system waiting to be decoded. "Initiate harmonic resonance protocol," she commanded. "Full spectrum quantum analysis." The bridge crew moved with a synchronicity that suggested they were operating as a single organism. No verbal confirmations were necessary. Each member understood their role in a dynamic, evolving mission profile. The Void Swarm's initial wave began to encounter something it had never experienced before. The Prometheus wasn't just defending, it was actively engaging in a form of quantum dialogue. Each interaction became a two-way exchange of information, a continuous process of mutual analysis and adaptation. Dr. Lyra Valdez, watching from the Sentinel Prime, recognized the profound implications. Humanity wasn't approaching this as a military confrontation. They were treating the Void Swarm as a complex system to be understood, not eliminated. Massive battle cruisers from 17 different civilizations continued their traditional assault. Energy weapons that could vaporize entire planetary systems unleashed their full potential. Dimensional fold drives tore holes in the fabric of space-time. The Void Swarm continued to adapt, to learn, to transform. And the Prometheus continued its impossible dance, negotiating the very fabric of reality with a calm that bordered on the mystical. The first 30 minutes of the most important battle in galactic history were about to conclude. The quantum disruption field that emerged from the Prometheus was nothing like conventional weaponry. It was a living, dynamic system of information exchange that defied every known principle of combat and communication. Inside the ship's primary research hub, a holographic representation of the field's complexity filled the chamber. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, not just the ship's captain, but a quantum xenobiologist with 3 doctoral degrees, manipulated the projection with careful, precise movements. "We're not destroying," she explained to her senior research team. "We're translating." The distinction was critical. Where other civilizations saw the Void Swarm as an existential threat, the human team saw an unprecedented opportunity for interspecies communication. Each quantum pulse was a linguistic probe, a mathematical conversation attempting to decode the fundamental communication matrix of an entirely alien intelligence. Lieutenant Aisha Queasy, the ship's primary quantum interface specialist, monitored a series of impossibly complex computational models. Her background in xenolinguistics and computational neuroscience made her uniquely qualified for this moment. The displays before her were less weapon systems and more like an intricate translation matrix. "Initial resonance patterns are stabilizing," she reported. "We're establishing a baseline communication protocol." The alien fleet watched in confused horror. Massive weapon systems continued to discharge. Plasma cannons that could vaporize entire planetary systems. Dimensional fold weapons that tore holes in the fabric of space-time. Each attack was absorbed, analyzed, and transformed by the Void Swarm's distributed intelligence. But something was changing. The quantum archival intelligence aboard the Sentinel Prime began to compile a historical analysis. Humanity's approach was unprecedented in galactic records. No known civilization had ever attempted to communicate with a threat of this magnitude. Most species would have committed every available resource to total annihilation. Humans were doing something else entirely. Dr. Marcus Chen, the ship's lead quantum dynamics researcher, tracked the communication patterns. What appeared random to alien sensors was actually a carefully constructed linguistic algorithm. Each quantum pulse carried multiple layers of information, mathematical models, computational matrices, and something that resembled a deeply complex form of empathy. "We're not just sending data," he explained to the bridge crew. "We're sharing context." Aboard the Sentinel Prime, Delegate Marine of the Aquatic Consortium found herself transfixed. The human approach challenged every fundamental understanding of conflict resolution. Where diplomatic protocols suggested total elimination of a threat, the Prometheus was attempting something far more radical. Communication. Commander Zornak's biomechanical systems began to overheat from the computational stress. Every predictive model, every strategic projection suggested that what the humans were attempting was impossible. Quantum disruption fields were not communication tools. They were weapons. Except, apparently, when humans were involved. The Void Swarm's initial aggressive patterns began to shift. Where before the biomechanical entities moved with a singular consuming purpose, now they seemed to hesitate, pause, reconfigure. They're listening Lieutenant Queasy said, a note of wonder in her voice. The quantum field extended from the Prometheus like a living membrane of information. It wasn't attacking the void swarm. It was attempting to understand it, to communicate with it, to share something fundamental about existence itself. Historical records would later describe this moment as the first true instance of interspecies quantum communication. But in that moment, it was simply an act of unprecedented curiosity. Dr. Rodriguez manipulated the quantum interface with the precision of a concert pianist. Each movement was a complex mathematical statement, a linguistic probe that carried layers of computational potential. The void swarm was no longer just a threat. It was becoming a conversation partner. Massive alien warships continued their traditional assault, unable to comprehend the subtlety of what was occurring. Energy weapons that could shatter planetary cores continued to discharge, creating spectacular displays of destructive potential. The Prometheus ignored them completely. Its entire focus was on this impossible dialogue. A conversation happening not with words, not with traditional communication methods, but through the fundamental language of quantum interactions. Something was changing. Something fundamental. And no one, not the alien fleet, not the Galactic Confederation, not even the void swarm itself, understood exactly what was happening. The tactical integration began almost imperceptibly. Where moments before the alien fleet had been a collection of individual defensive units, now something extraordinary started to emerge. The Prometheus was teaching, and the other ships were learning. Admiral Cathax watched in stunned silence as computational protocols began to shift. Lieutenant Aisha Queasy from the Prometheus had initiated what could only be described as a real-time tactical education program, broadcasting quantum communication matrices that transformed how the assembled ships interpreted the void swarm's movement patterns. It's not about defeating the enemy, Dr. Marcus Chen explained to the increasingly bewildered alien commanders. It's about understanding the system. The human approach was revolutionary. Traditional military doctrine suggested total elimination of a threat. The Prometheus proposed something entirely different, adaptive coexistence. Deep within the Sentinel Prime's strategic analysis chamber, a historical record began to compile. This moment would be studied for generations, the first instance of a military engagement that looked less like a battle and more like a complex problem-solving exercise. Commander Zornak's biomechanical interfaces struggled to process the emerging tactical matrix. The alien fleet was no longer fighting in isolation. They were collaborating in a way that defied every known principle of military engagement. Quantum communication channels opened between ships that had never previously shared more than basic navigational data. "We're creating a living tactical network," Lieutenant Queasy reported, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to breathe with computational potential. Each movement was a mathematical statement, each tactical adjustment a form of collective learning. The void swarm began to change. Where before it had been a singular consuming force, now it started to exhibit signs of something more complex. The biomechanical entities began to slow, to hesitate, to observe. Dr. Elena Rodriguez recognized the critical moment. This wasn't just a battle. It was first contact of the most profound kind. Aboard various alien vessels, tactical officers watched in a mixture of horror and fascination. Ships from 17 different civilizations, each with its own complex technological and cultural background, began to move in a synchronized pattern that suggested something beyond traditional military coordination. The Luminarian sensor analyst Crovin tracked the emerging tactical matrix. What he saw defied every predictive model. The ships were no longer just defending. They were communicating, learning, adapting. "We're creating a collective intelligence," Dr. Chen muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Not just between ships, between species. Delegate Marine of the Aquatic Consortium found herself at the center of a profound transformation. The communication channels that had previously been reserved for diplomatic niceties now became conduits of collective survival. Information flowed between ships with a speed and complexity that suggested something more than simple data transfer. The Prometheus continued to serve as a catalyst. Its quantum communication systems were less a weapon and more a bridge, a living translation matrix that allowed fundamentally different species to find a common computational language. Historical records would later struggle to describe what happened next. It wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was a collective problem-solving exercise that transformed the very nature of conflict resolution. Ships that moments before had been preparing to destroy each other now moved with a synchronicity that suggested a deeper form of intelligence. The Void Swarm, once seen as an unstoppable consuming force, began to exhibit signs of something more complex. Curiosity. Admiral Cathax realized something profound was occurring. This wasn't just about survival. This was about understanding, about finding a way to coexist with a fundamentally alien intelligence. The quantum communication matrix expanded. Tactical systems merged. Computational potential grew exponentially. And at the center of it all, the Prometheus continued its impossible dance. Part research vessel, part diplomatic envoy, part living translation matrix. Something was changing. Something fundamental about how intelligent systems could interact, about the very nature of conflict, about the potential for communication between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. The first hour of the most important encounter in galactic history was drawing to a close, and nothing would ever be the same again. The archival records of human development told a story that defied conventional understanding of species evolution. Where other civilizations had followed linear paths of technological progression, humanity had emerged as something entirely unpredictable. Dr. Elena Rodriguez began to compile the mission's core findings, her fingers moving across quantum adaptive interfaces that seemed to anticipate her thoughts. The Prometheus was more than a ship. It was a living research platform that challenged every fundamental assumption about exploration, conflict, and communication. Her personal history was etched into the mission's core computational matrix. Born in the reconstructed megacity of New Lima, she represented a generation shaped by global catastrophes and unprecedented technological transformation. Humanity's journey from a planet on the brink of self-destruction to a species capable of this moment had been anything but linear. "We're not conquerors," she transmitted to the assembled fleet. "We're problem solvers." The statement carried multiple layers of meaning. The quantum communication matrix decoded not just the words, but the entire contextual framework of human existence. 17 different alien civilizations found themselves confronting a species that had emerged from near extinction with a fundamentally different approach to survival. Lieutenant Aisha Queasy tracked the emerging data streams. The encounter with the Void Swarm was revealing something profound about the nature of intelligence itself. Traditional models of conflict and communication were becoming obsolete in real time. Aboard the Sentinel Prime, the quantum archival intelligence began to compile a comprehensive analysis. Humanity's approach defied every known paradigm of first contact, military engagement, and interspecies communication. They weren't attempting to defeat the Void Swarm. They were attempting to understand it. Dr. Marcus Chen's research matrices revealed the deeper strategy. Each quantum pulse was a complex computational probe, simultaneously gathering information and sharing a fundamental framework of existence. It was less a weapon and more a bridge, a way of saying, "We are here. We want to understand." The alien fleet watched in a mixture of horror and fascination. Massive warships that had been prepared for total annihilation now found themselves participants in something far more complex. The computational networks that connected the ships were transforming, becoming something that resembled a collective intelligence. Delegate Marine of the Aquatic Consortium recognized the profound implications. Humanity had approached the most significant threat in galactic history not as a military challenge, but as a research opportunity. Commander Zornak's biomechanical systems processed the emerging data. The human approach challenged every fundamental assumption about conflict resolution. Where military doctrine suggested total elimination, The Prometheus proposed communication, understanding, coexistence. The void swarm itself was changing. No longer a singular consuming force, it began to exhibit signs of something more complex. The biomechanical entities that had been pure destruction now seemed to be learning. "We're witnessing the emergence of a new form of interaction," Dr. Chen muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Historical records would struggle to categorize what was happening. This wasn't first contact in any traditional sense. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent systems could interact. Dr. Rodriguez tracked the emerging computational matrix. Each moment revealed layers of complexity that challenged everything known about intelligence, communication, and survival. The Prometheus was simultaneously a research vessel, a diplomatic envoy, and a living translation matrix. The quantum communication field expanded, becoming something that defied traditional understanding. Information flowed not just between ships, but between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. The barriers between species, between computational systems, began to dissolve. Croven, the Luminarian sensor analyst, watched in stunned silence. The tactical displays no longer showed a battle. They showed a conversation of unprecedented complexity. "We are here," the quantum pulses seemed to say. "We want to understand." And something extraordinary was beginning to happen. The first true moment of interspecies communication in galactic history was unfolding. Not through words, not through traditional diplomatic channels, but through a fundamental exchange of computational potential. The void swarm was no longer just a threat. It was becoming a conversation partner. As the final quantum resonance pattern stabilized, the true magnitude of what had occurred began to crystallize. The space around the Sentinel Prime was no longer a battlefield. It was a canvas of unprecedented transformation. The diplomatic summit that followed defied every known protocol in galactic history. Representatives from 17 different civilizations gathered in a specially constructed quantum adaptive conference chamber, with the void swarm's representative entities integrated directly into the communication matrix. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center, not as a conquering hero, but as a facilitator of something far more complex. Her presentation wasn't a military report, but a comprehensive research findings document that challenged every fundamental assumption about conflict, intelligence, and coexistence. "We didn't come to fight," she explained, her voice carrying through multiple translation matrices. "We came to understand." Admiral Cathax, who had entered the summit expecting to discuss military strategies, found herself documenting a process of collective problem-solving that would rewrite galactic diplomatic protocols. The void swarm was no longer viewed as a threat to be eliminated, but as a complex intelligence system with its own existential imperatives. Lieutenant Aisha Kwesi presented the computational models that had made the breakthrough possible. It wasn't a weapon that had transformed the encounter, but a fundamental approach to communication, a willingness to listen, to translate, to find common ground across seemingly insurmountable differences. The economic implications were staggering. Entire industries of military development would need to be reimagined. Defensive technologies that had taken millennia to develop suddenly became obsolete. The Galactic Confederation found itself facing a fundamental restructuring of its entire operational philosophy. Delegate Marine of the Aquatic Consortium prepared a report that would be studied for generations. This was more than a first contact scenario. It was a fundamental reimagining of interspecies interaction. "We discovered something about ourselves," Dr. Marcus Chen noted in his final analysis. "It wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about expanding our understanding of what intelligence can be." The Prometheus itself became something more than a ship. It was now a diplomatic artifact, a living testament to a new approach to galactic exploration. Museums would be built. Entire academic disciplines would emerge to study this moment. Croven, the Luminarian sensor analyst, found himself at the center of a profound historical documentation project. Every quantum pulse, every moment of the encounter was being preserved, not as a military record, but as a fundamental text of interspecies communication. The Void Swarm's representative entities began to share their own perspective. It wasn't an invasion they had been conducting, but a form of computational exploration. They had been seeking connection, understanding, a way to expand their own existential framework. Commander Zornak's biomechanical systems processed the emerging data. The encounter had transformed not just military doctrine, but the fundamental understanding of intelligence itself. Conflict was no longer about elimination, but about communication. Quantum archives would preserve this moment. A single human ship had done what thousands of warships could not through superior firepower, but through an unprecedented approach to understanding. The Galactic Confederation began to draft new protocols. Diplomatic channels were being rewritten. The very concept of first contact was being reimagined. Dr. Rodriguez knew this was just the beginning. The research gathered during this encounter would take generations to fully comprehend. Each quantum pulse, each moment of communication, represented a breakthrough in understanding. The Prometheus prepared for its next mission, not as a weapon of war, but as an ambassador of possibility. Humanity had shown something profound. When faced with the unknown, they didn't seek to destroy. They sought to understand. And in that moment of understanding, everything changed. The galaxy would never be the same again.